Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Loft. My name is Wesley Garcia, Director of Loft Connections, and my pronouns are he, him.
And my name is Julia Black, and I am the Director of Worship, and my pronouns are she, her. The Loft is a conversation-based community, and that means that we believe that conversation and open dialogue with one another is the best way to connect more deeply with our faith and the divine.
We're also an inclusive and affirming community that welcomes all people from all walks of life. But we do it a special invitation to the LGBTQ plus community. You are welcome here, you are supported here, you are included here.
We gather together every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. But we are not just Sunday friends. We also get together multiple times throughout the week. So if you have any interest in joining us or if you have any questions, please reach out. We can be found at theloftla.org.
Thanks for tuning in. Come be a part of the conversation.
I know enough to know I don't know much at all. Now how does that saying go about pride before the fall? I'm biting my tongue here instead of speaking my mind. 'Cause if I say what I'm thinking, my words will be out of line. So I take a quick moment to clear my head before I say something that I never should have said. Another quick moment to catch my breath, 'cause what I'm feeling right now, it's got me on the edge. On the edge. I know enough to know time ain't gonna wait. Seasons come and go. You gotta step up to the plate. There really ain't no wrong way to do the right thing. So pay close attention when the small voice starts beckoning. And then you take a quick moment to clear your head, and then you say everything you ever should have said. Another quick moment to catch your breath, 'cause what you're feeling right now, it's got you on the edge. On the edge. We're going over the edge. Out in the unknown, all of a sudden things are crystal clear. Uncertainty has shown definitively how to be aware of all the things we have outgrown and shed off just like a second skin. Feeling light up on my feet again, get in and get to be free again. know enough to know love won't steer me wrong. I know enough to know, I know enough to know, I know enough to know.
Terence, I'm glad to be with you again today and with our Loft community for more conversation about cultivating community. We had planned this week to talk about grief and loss as a part of the work of being community, of cultivating community. And my heart continues to be heavy with specific grief and actual loss in our world. And this week, my heart is heavy with news of another shooting of a Black man by police and the death of Dante Wright. A friend of mine, a friend of yours too, Hannah Bonner, has traveled to Minneapolis at the invitation of one of her friends and colleagues, who has been one of the caretakers of the intersection that's become known as George Floyd Square in Minneapolis. That's there where George Floyd was murdered by police, and the community has set up a memorial there. And I knew that there was attention to that place as a location of grief and an acknowledgement of loss, but I hadn't really paid attention to the details of what's come to be there. And I found myself just overwhelmed with emotion, learning more about the ways that community has come together to make that a space that not only remembers and marks George Floyd's life as precious and sacred, but does so in a way that expansively makes space for so many griefs, particularly grief that comes out of violence against Black lives. The intersection there has become an informal roundabout, and in the middle of the intersection, they've created an installation of earth, and it's been planted with plants. I read one account that described how they were all plants that had been discarded, that were thrown out, gathered together in this holy center to mark a place and a life and Black lives as holy and blessed and beloved, so that now it can function as a place of pilgrimage and remembrance. I was just moved to think of not only the heaviness that that we all bear, but that's particularly born as this, I mean, I feel silly saying this to you, Terence, that's particularly born by Black lives in our community and world, as another death reminds us of the ongoing trauma of racial injustice, of the trauma of white supremacy. That grief is real, but also it was a reminder of the importance of community and of grieving together, and the gift of community and prayer as somehow transformational.
Yeah. I think yes, that's beautiful, and having that as a model, and you reflected with me earlier about how so often when we as the church fail to be that sacred place, that the community creates that space for itself, and divinity becomes attached to it by mere virtue of its virtue, which is really cool. And I don't want another memorial. This week was another one of those weeks where I'm sure folks can relate, where I just caught myself on those video loops again, where I'm looking at another video and another video thinking, like, this, seriously, this cannot be happening again. And every inflection of it, it's like learning a nuance of a language. And so I mean, you know the language now, you expect exactly what's going to come from it. You know its syntax, its verbs, its grammatical, kind of rules. And then you see a new inflection of it. So like, this week when you had the black police detective who was undercover at a protest to kind of see what was going on and report back if there any kind of crimes being committed, etc. And then to have him be severely beaten and arrested as a protester, even though he was a police officer, like an undercover detective, and then his white partner, who was also there undercover, got arrested as a protester but didn't get touched. And so you like have moments like that. And then the one that struck me like most strong this week was Coron Nazario, standing, as someone who served in the military as well, watching him in his uniform, just knowing, sitting through, and we totally need to do a loft series on militarism because I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. But just in principle, the idea that when you enlist, when you become an officer in the Army, you swear an oath to like protect lives, right? Protect people's rights, and to be willing to sacrifice your own life for the sake of other people's rights. And then to have that man in his uniform who's committed himself to protecting this. I'm gonna be careful with my language, but this evil officer who then would see that in real time and know and be a veteran himself and then do like, so I was in shock and loop mode. So this conversation, hopefully this service together today, will be helpful for me because I know there's a whole lot of like packed up loss and grief over COVID is huge, right? Hundreds and thousands of people impacted and affected, and we have this dual pandemic still raging in our souls. And so if we just want to take a second right now to break into our groups together, not even with a formal question, but just to say this week, if it's hit you like it's hit me and hit Molly, probably could deal with just some open space to kind of process together. So we'll break into our groups now just to start, give you a chance to just kind of check in, soul check, kind of see where you're at, and then we'll come in together with some scripture and see if we can help add some theological reflection and some community support to help us process through this time. So let's do that now. So Molly, in our scripture for today, I love the scripture and I hate the scripture. We have, I think you and I both have kind of a love-hate relationship with what's packed in here. And a lot of that has to do with maybe the baggage in terms of how we initially heard it and how we initially received it. So we know on weeks like this, when we hear the kind of old King James version of the translation and the kind of evangelical gloss that we got, that many of us got kind of in our upbringing or Christian formation, that said, God works all things together for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. So like just this idea that like I look at a week like this and I think, if God is smart and powerful as we would claim God to be, like why would you work all this together? You can work some other things together and come out with similar outcomes. Why would we do this version? But obviously, as later revisions and translations came together to kind of get to the better essence of the passage, there's a reading or a construct where you can say that God works in all things, not God works all those things together, but like God works in all things in the sense that God is present with us in the midst of those things. And so I think that kind of reshaping how our theological formation works on this is really crucial, because I think when you come into a week like this, if your theology is telling you, hey, this is just the way it is, like just roll with it, just let it happen, you find yourself in that same mental space of the officer who pulled over Coron Nazario, who was like, hey, this is how it works. You just pull over, you get out, you do exactly what I say. Don't drive to a well-lit place. Don't try to help us help you. Like none of that. Like let's just go with the process. Just trust it's supposed to happen. And so there's this sense in which, like, when our theology says like what's happening in the world is somehow defensible, that there's some reason or justification for it being wrong or bad, that we can think that if God's working all this together, we just assume that God somehow, in the same section of scripture, predestining us to experience these things. Like that can lead to not only internalized hurt and harm, but a willingness to be comfortable with the status quo and to not be willing to say, hey, no, this isn't happening the way it should, and God doesn't want it to happen this way. There's nothing about this that should be working together for the good. This is working together for our harm. And the only way we can be properly mentally and spiritually equipped in this is to understand that, like, our God does not want any of this crap to happen, and we should be focused on what it means in society to hold each other accountable to being something that's not futile in its initial inception, but that's from its very inception in its design meant to be something that's good and loving and redemptive. And the groanings and the pain and suffering that are happening right now are a result of our failings, not of some kind of divine shaping of how the world is meant to be. And so you have some interesting thoughts on kind of how that manifests itself, like in a mutual acquaintance's life.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that this sort of way of framing it and like crystallizing it into like a quip that can be on a t-shirt or like a mug that you feel like you can hold or wear as a like condensation of an affirmation of like some kind of Pollyanna vision is really destructive, because the reality is there are a lot of things that are horrible, and that way of thinking can get like demented into this lie that suggests that if we're good Christians, then things will be going well for us. I mean, so when Paul talks about like these present sufferings are, nothing compared to this promise to come, there's sort of this like, well, just hang on, it's going to get good. And if you're a good Christian, it's going to get, it's going to be good. And so then we have a temptation to like judge ourselves or others based on whether or not our experience of the world reflects like ease or goodness or what we hope for. And that's just so dangerous and unhelpful. So I want to give thanks that scripture was not written on a mug or like a t-shirt, that it's actually like a lot more complicated and nuanced than that. And sometimes I think our scripture writers like didn't even know what they were making space for when they chose the words they used. Like, I wonder if Paul had a nuanced understanding of childbirth when he chose the childbirth as a metaphor for the present sufferings, because I don't think he did. And I think it's an interesting way of like looking at the world and opening up space for something transformational happening and struggle that's not a thing into itself, but that's somehow participating in an unfolding of possibility that's going to be life on the other side. Like, that gives me hope. But the reality is, scripture also comes to us as people who like know that things suck and need help dealing with that. And scripture gives us lots of like ways to do that. I mean, the Psalms are full of angry calling out to God and desperate lamenting and calling out of what's broken and wrong and asking for God. And it's a disservice to us and to our community and to God if we act like there's not space for any of that in our Christian tradition. This just about in the last week, there was a Twitter flare up of drama around a new prayer book that Sarah Bessey edited called A Rhythm of Prayer. Each prayer was written by a different woman, and one of them was written by Shaniqua Walker Barnes, who wrote a prayer of an angry Black woman and begins with the honest anger that's praying to God for the ability to hate white people. She moves the prayer through the very real experience and posture of what it's like to long after God's love and deal with the reality of white supremacy and the system that we're a part of. And it's a beautiful prayer that invites all of us who read it, those who inhabit Black bodies and those of us who don't, to like take on this prayer of a companion in our journey whose life experience invites us to wrestle with real struggle and loss and pain and to bring that to God. And I think that it gives me hope that that's part of what happens when we come together, is the community that is the church. I don't mean the like institutional church, but like the community that's the like living the real community of church.
Yeah. And so I think that's hitting deeply, only because I think, yeah, maybe that's it. Like, here's what I mean. So when I think about the scripture and it talks about, hope that you can actually see the results of isn't actually hope at all. It doesn't require anything. And so when Paul starts talking about what the consolation is in the midst of this groaning and suffering and the world not being as it should be and creation stuck in futility, like when Paul says, like, what is the antidote for that? Like, the sense of hope is the Spirit. So creation is futile. Our individual souls, like in the previous chapter, us wrestling through wanting to be something good but never being able to quite measure up to that. Like, for all of that, our hope sits in the fact that God is with us, that the Spirit is present with us, and all of that suffering and agony, like the Spirit is there. And so, in and of as much as you're sharing this concept that, like, being there, being present with each other, being community in the midst of this, I mean, I wonder if that's the end in itself. When I went off to boot camp, I'll never forget one of the early lessons that your drill sergeants tried to like break you from being like an individualistically minded like civilian into being like a communally focused like cohesive unit is the drill sergeants were just they were just mean, just relentlessly mean. And so they would like yell at you, and then if you did something wrong, like they would just hound you. 3 or 4 of them would come around you, yell at you, like degrade you, etc. And they'd make you drop down and do push-ups, and you'd have to do more push-ups than you could ever possibly do, and you'd reach muscle failure, and it would just be, you just feel ashamed, like you'd feel worthless to the world. And somewhere, several weeks in, this moment happened where someone was getting, I wish I could be the person that did this, but I wasn't that cool. Someone was just getting just railed by the drill sergeants, just railed. And one lone soldier went over to that other soldier, and while they were down there doing push-ups, just got down there with them and took the same heat and like abuse from the drill sergeants. And you could, they wouldn't admit to it, but you could see each of them kind of slightly break a smile, that they identified that, oh, wait, they finally got it. There was this moment of crossover. And then from that moment forward, anytime anyone in the whole unit got attacked or pushed and had to do push-ups, the whole unit, everybody immediately dropped to the ground and started pushing. And so there's this sense in which that response, like inside of us, that shifts us from the kind of individual mindset to that sense of connection. We also referred to it as like, sometimes you forget or don't even care like what you're fighting against or what you're fighting for. Sometimes when battle's a certain amount of intense, all that really matters is, are you fighting for the person that's to the left and right of you in the foxhole? And so in that same sense, like as I think about this idea of God being with us in the midst of all this chaos and us being present with each other in the midst of all this, that still doesn't resolve for me the theological issues of why we're in this situation or why this has to keep happening. And it at least gives me the comfort to know that I can come into a place like this and be with people who will hear and listen and encourage and support. And if nothing else, just like mourn and lament and cry together as a space of solidarity. And so I guess maybe that is the hope and consolation, because I'm not sure I can find it anywhere else.
Well, I have to say that I don't believe that God is like an angry drill sergeant. So like I love this like very specific model of what human community and solidarity looks like. But I believe we start from a place of blessedness, that God from the beginning of creation and in the incarnation is declaring every life as blessed and declaring that Black lives matter and that you are precious and beloved, and that God knows you to your inmost being. And so we begin from a like different starting place. This doesn't explain away any of the suffering and struggle and evil, but it's a beginning point that starts in affirmation. And then we get to be the community that chooses solidarity with each other, that gets down in the mud, literally together, that shows up for each other when we don't have easy answers or solutions, when we can't take away the pain. We sit in it together, and it changes to carry this weight of grief together. I've recently been thinking about an image that comes through Henry Nouwen. Others have used other ways of visualizing this, but he thinks about the world as being like a wheel, and he says a wagon wheel. And I grew up along the Oregon Trail, so like this works for me, but like a bicycle wheel works too, if that like Conestoga wagon doesn't resonate for you. So like spokes on a wheel, and we start at the edge, and then the center is God. And when we move toward God, we also move toward each other. That there's this inseparable relationship between drawing closer to God and drawing closer to each other. And for me, this is most visible and powerful when we think about grieving together, because we become close to each other. So it's not as we fear that there's like an economy of how much grief we can bear. And if we honor my grief, there's not space for yours. Instead, when we honor my grief, it connects us more deeply and breaks our hearts open to be ready to receive your grief too. So it's not like we've moved on, and so we're no longer thinking about George Floyd now that we grieve for Dante. And it doesn't mean that we've forgotten the 6 Asian American women killed in Atlanta. And it doesn't mean that we've forgotten our beloved family members who've died during this time of COVID. Like all of that breaks open our heart and draws us together. So I guess that's my hope for the community, that even in this time of displacement, that we as a Loft community will continue to know how to show up for each other. And this isn't like a magical healing balm that like I can dispense as pastor, but it's the thing we do for each other as we claim each other and show up. It's what community looks like. That's not just it includes celebration and joy, and sometimes they get unexpectedly knit up together with our moments of grief, but it means showing up and grieving and being with each other. So I guess part of my prayer is that we can do that. It's hard.
Amen. Well, let's unpack these things together.
Josh Lopez Reyes here, he, him, his. Thanks again for being with us today. If you would like to stay connected with the events happening in the community, or perhaps one of our groups that is currently meeting online throughout the week, please visit theloftla.org. And please support this work. If you found it helpful, please share it with others who might find it to be a blessing. Another way that you can support, if you're able to, is by giving online, and you can also do so by checking out the giving tab on the website. So as we leave this space today, may you dare to be brave, may you know that you belong, and may you remember that you are loved. Peace.